Alright, YouTube, so as promised, I did rip this one down way further than most of the other guys who've torn these things down did. Completely took apart the chuck and cleaned everything up. You know, from the previous video, I'm sure you saw the sound that thing was making was horrific and spewing dust and shit. So, the first order of business for most mechanics is to just take apart most of the actual straight mechanical parts of it, like gears and whatnot. Clean them up, look them over. There was nothing really worth noting about it. All the gears looked fine, so mechanically, the chuck portion is fine. So that could be something I could salvage and use on something else, especially because it's a hammer drill chuck, so that's cool. As you can see, I did manage to get the back of the motor off. What I had to do was actually grind these little sections here. Let me get my pointer. I had to grind down the crimp mark things that they did to seal this on so I could take it off and get a better look at everything. I mean, I kind of mangled it a little bit trying to get it off. As you can see, it's a little burnt. I mean, this is a very thin metal, but it's surprisingly well held up for what I was doing to it. But this is what it would look like if it was on there. Right, it would be on there, and there would be the brushes and everything involved. And I wanted to see the other side of this to see if it was a bushing or a bearing. And as you can see, it is just a bushing. This is just a piece of bronze, basically, or brass. I don't know, one of those yellow freaking metals. But either way, it's not a bearing, and it's not something that can be replaced. So this is one of those things that just inevitably fails. The more you use the tool, the looser this will get, the looser this will get. And that sound that it's been making is, I found this out when I started cleaning the shmoo out of the front here. If you look really closely, right where the metal of the outer housing meets that shaft, this moves in and out, right? So when I push this down, that rim where it comes close to the shaft where the gear is really jagged and uneven. And I think what's happening is the bearing housing and all of that is just loose enough that this moves forward and backward to the point where every once in a while it'll and just kind of take a little bit off every time. And I mean, the amazing thing is it's still running. So I mean, but until I did this to it, obviously. So it was still working. And what I found is, I mean, this thing, I can feel the magnets in it as it's moving, but this whole thing has a lot of slop in it, and all of that is supposed to be controlled by this bearing. So the more you use it, the looser it gets, and the worse it runs over time. But what kills me is everything about its electrical components, it was fine. Here are the brushes, if you wanted to be able to get a good look at the brushes. As you can see, there's actually a mark from what these weak freaking springs were doing to it, just pushing against the back of the brush. And I actually had to get this out in a really interesting way. I had to pull this whole assembly out of the housing, and you have to push the brush forward in order to get it out of this brass brush holder, because they put this cap at the end of that slot there where the braiding for what connects the brush to anything electrical goes in, this little channel there that stops at the top here. So they purposely designed it so that you have to have the mechanical know-how to completely take this whole thing apart just to change the goddamn brushes. And the brushes are exceedingly soft, as you'll see when I actually turn this brush sideways. It's hard to do this and look at the camera at the same time. But you can see how there's wipes of it being mushed on both sides, and that's what the front of it looks like. It's very porous, very soft. I could probably dig my thumbnail into it and leave a solid impression of it. And these are the springs that are that apply the back pressure to the brushes. It's a simple little twist spring. You know, you find these things in all kinds of different mechanical devices. I prefer the flat springs when I see them because they apply a more even pressure on the whole back of the brush so that you don't get that kind of a dimple. But that is a good indicator that the brush itself is very weak. And another clear indicator that this is a throwaway type tool is that this whole housing is one piece. That you can't take this brush is seemingly welded to this thing. Like they use the brush housing sort of like a bus bar, and they tack weld the braided portion for the brush to that housing, and then weld the one lead from the trigger to that brush. And same thing on the other side. So they basically made it so that if you want to change the brush, you have to change the housing, but the housing isn't removable. It's, as you can see, it's just staked on. So in order to replace this, if it was even an option, which I've looked into it, and it's not, you can't buy parts for these, you'd have to replace this whole goddamn thing just to change the goddamn brushes. So that's annoying as shit. Besides that, I also noticed right here, which is super weird. I didn't do that, and as you can see, all I did, this just pulls sideways out, so there's no kind of force I would apply to this to make that thing sit unevenly like that. So, I mean, maybe that would explain why getting batteries in and out of this was such a pain in the ass, because it really was. That was one of the big things about this Bauer line that really got annoying over time that I didn't think would annoy me when I first got it, was getting batteries in and out of this stupid battery case of, like, the terminal was such a pain in the dick. I really hated it. And it just got worse and worse over time, especially when it's like, you know, the end of the day, you're frustrated, you're like, fuck, the thing ran out of power, I only need to put 3 more screws in. And, I mean, everything else about it was great. The hammer drill especially, the chuck is fantastic. That never had a problem, but this is a weird thing to have go bad first. Not the trigger, which is normally what would go bad. This whole assembly here normally futzes out first, but that didn't go bad. And then the next thing is maybe you'll blow out some MOSFETs because it's a variable speed trigger and it controls voltage, and the MOSFETs maybe weren't heat sinked properly, which basically I don't think they're heat sinked at all, because yeah, it doesn't seem like it is at all. And then after that would be, it lasts long enough to wear out the brushes, which in this case would definitely freaking happen because there's so little of this thing even left now. That compared to the overall length of that, how little of it is actually left is kind of laughable. When you actually have the commutator in there and try to make this, I'm going to push this forward so you can see. This would be right around, come on, now you don't want to do it. There we go. Right around there. And that would be its like go-to, it's touching the commutator, and when you pull the trigger, stuff will happen now thing. And there's only about that much of the brush left. Because obviously you can't go all the way down to the fucking braiding, because that's not going to work. So, for it only being 4 or 5 months old, I mean, this literally, it was made seemingly to only work just past its 90-day warranty. So, I mean, I guess if you bought the 1 or 2 year warranty and you want to be one of those guys that, okay, this one's bad, I want to go trade it in, get a new one now, under the Harbor Freight warranty, which, I mean, they're famous for their warranties. They'll take back pretty much anything, especially hand tools. But, I suppose if they definitely honor that warranty, if you buy the extended warranty, wear it out like this and get it replaced, and can continue doing that, then for the 2 years, then maybe it pays for itself, sure. Maybe. But, toward the end of that life cycle, you're going to be looking at a rougher operation. Don't get me wrong, this thing never stopped working. It still worked. It was just very, very rough. And, I mean, I did what I could with the chuck, but, I mean, clearly the chuck wasn't the problem. It was this whole time. Also, I noticed that they did epoxy the windings, but they let some of the epoxy get to the friggin' fan, which may or may not have contributed to its problem. Because maybe that, you know, unbalanced it or something, because I don't really see any, you know, marks on any of this that would indicate that it's been balanced. Which maybe it wasn't. Maybe that's what makes it so cheap, I guess. Oh, and there was a piece that that plastic doohickey right here, that was on the front here, and that's what makes the final seal to all the gears that go inside of the actual chuck. And, I mean, I've ground the gears on here, I know I have, but these must be seriously hard, because I haven't seen a single mark on them. So, the gears didn't fail, the mechanical and electrical components of it didn't fail. It's the fact that they made it a bearing instead of a bushing, basically. I mean, a bushing instead of a bearing. So, that is what made it start to act really rough. And then this is what makes it clear that they have no intention of this being a serviceable tool. Not to mention the fact that I had to grind off the tabs that are hammered over in order to even get this the fuck out in the first place. So that sucks. But there you go. That's the in-depth teardown of this thing. And Now you know, I mean, I guess I'll try to give you a better look at all this. Mabuchi motor. Get a good look at that. I'll just stick that back in there. As you can see, a lot of dirt came out of this thing. And you can see this. See how on the inside there, it's been chewed up. That's what it actually looks like at the back when you look at the back of the tool when you take the thing apart. Then there's, I guess it'll give you a close-up of this whole assembly. Obviously this spring was up here. Down to here, again, very dirty, but it was cool how this all came out as one unit. There's the heat sink. Try to get that clean. Hold on. There, that way you guys can... I'm not familiar with that company, but whatever. If it means anything to anybody, there you go. And that you could see by just taking apart the housing, so that's not doing you any favors. But yeah, so there you go, guys. I think I'll take apart the battery next.